Welcome to Web3 Watchdogs, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of Web3 security, compliance, and risk. Join Michael Pearl as he interviews executives from across the Web3 industry to uncover the challenges and opportunities of this rapidly evolving space. Web3 Watchdogs is sponsored by Cyvers, your one-stop shop for Web3 security and threat mitigation. Cyvers harnesses the power of AI to eliminate hacks, scams, fraud, and compliance challenges in real time, and even before they happen. For more information, visit cyvers.ai. That's CYVERS.ai.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Web3 Watchdogs podcast, that podcast that takes a deep dive into everything security, compliance, risk, fraud, and everything that helps keep Web3 safe. And today we have with us Scott Minneman. Scott is a proactive information security and technology executive. He has over 15 years of IT experience. He is currently the CISO and head of risk at ZeroHash, after serving as the VP Risk and Audit and the Director of Governance, Risk, and Compliance in the platform. Scott, you went all the way through all the departments in ZeroHash. And prior to that, Scott served as the Information Security Manager at NetStandard and the COO at Ready Systems. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Happy to be here.
Great. So as I just mentioned, you have quite a diverse background and, if I may say, quite an unusual journey at ZeroHash. So you went from being a Juris Doctor to managing the governance, risk, compliance, and so on. And eventually you landed at being a CISO. So can you elaborate about this journey and how it prepared you for this role?
Yeah, so the way I look at risk is really wide-ranging. It's enterprise-wide, it's cross-functional. There's really no such thing these days as a single-threaded risk. There's really no risk that's only a security risk or only a money laundering or fin crime risk or something. Everything is really interconnected. Even security itself as a concept is a risk function. The whole point of security is risk management. But even security risks, like I said, are all connected to compliance and fin crime, to finance, to reputation, to operations, like really everything. And I think this matters because truly understanding and managing risk requires experience. It requires a wide range of experience because you can't really see all of the connections without it. So when I bring my background in law, I was a practicing lawyer for a time, doing litigation, appearing in court, in operations, in company leadership, finances, strategy, all of these different types of experiences. This all comes into play for me really every single day. As I consider risk from all across the business, bringing all of these perspectives together to see how risks, decisions, and opportunities too can really impact the enterprise as a whole.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. First of all, being a lawyer myself and then kind of being dragged into the world of cybersecurity in crypto, I think it gives you a very good perspective and quite a different perspective on this whole field. And also, one thing that we saw in Cyvers is that everything is interconnected. First of all, due to the fact that most of these conglomerates can do many different things. I mean, the malicious conglomerates, right? So you can have the hacking department, and then you can have the scam department, and eventually money flows more or less to the same place. Same goes for money laundering and fraud and so on. So I totally agree with you that it is all interconnected.
Yeah, like you mentioned, these hacking groups are kind of almost like companies themselves these days. You've got the initial access group, you've got the exploit group, you've got the negotiation group. They're all, it is kind of like a little company.
Yeah. Not to mention the fact that basically they even have their own, internal VCs that are funding them, and they have their own service providers. So it's an ecosystem of its own. So let's dive into ZeroHash. So ZeroHash says it provides critical financial infrastructure for fiat crypto, stablecoin transactions, and so on. Can you kind of break down how your platform works, what kind of services are you doing, so we can better understand how you provide security to those services.
Yeah. So what we do, what ZeroHash does, is we simplify access to crypto and stablecoin technology by really focusing on two pain points for our customers. We take away the technical complexity and we take away the regulatory complexity. So to do that, we provide an API and an SDK. You can choose whichever one you want to do. And clients can use those to integrate our services really with just a few lines of code on the back end. They can end up launching crypto and stables products, in as short as a matter of weeks. We have a huge number of assets, a long list of chains, like I said, both crypto and stables. And of course, they all have their little individual nuances, right? Like on how these all work. But the point is that the client doesn't have to worry about any of that. All of the technical challenges and the regulatory challenges, the money transmission licenses, virtual currency licenses, exams, reporting obligations, monitoring, all of that stuff, they don't have to worry about any of that. So with us, a client can come to us, integrate with our backend, and then end up offering crypto and stablecoins without actually having to hold or handle or custody or transfer, or really have their hands on any of it. And so there's a lot of different use cases that we enable with this. There's a lot of clients that use us for some very different things. As a few examples out there, Stripe's using us for stablecoin payouts. You've got on-ramps like Shift4. You've got Felix doing remittances, Franklin Templeton doing tokenization, account funding for Kalshi, trading for IBKR. All of these, just some of the examples of companies that are using ZeroHash for the back end. All they really have to do is provide the front end.
Yeah, kind of like a white label for crypto services.
Yes, yeah, in a way. It's not fully white labeled. The end user does get exposed to the fact that it's ZeroHash on the back end. They can't completely hide that as a true white label type service. But we do make that as easy, as seamless, as streamlined as possible. Again, so that they don't have to worry about the complexities of all of this. This stuff is new and it's hard. And let us take that burden and you can focus on the things that you do well.
Yeah, totally agree. Especially if you're talking about companies that are doing crypto as part of their business and not as the main issue that they're focusing on. You mentioned Stripe, for instance, that do want to diversify and have some sort of a crypto service, but don't want to become a crypto company per se with everything that comes with it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's a big part of the reason why companies do come to us is this isn't our competency. We don't want to have to stand up a whole basically second business in order to learn and run and do this correctly and securely and do all the things. They can use us. We'll take care of all of that. They continue to do the thing that really grew them into where they are. They can focus, like I said, on what they do well and let us do what we do well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned good user experience, and you mentioned not being, preoccupied with the regulatory aspects and the security aspects and the compliance aspects. And I'm hearing a lot of heavy lifting from your end to build this infrastructure, to be compliant and to adhere to the regulatory requirements. Can you give us some kind of a bird's eye view onto how you built that in order for this whole system to run and for your users to get the best value?
You're right. It's not easy. We've been around 7 years. It's taken a while to get everything to the place where it's at here today. But really, we have a heavy focus on let's build the thing that enables today's use, tomorrow's use. Let's find a way to create the thing inside the system through development work, engineering work, infrastructure work that enables, Web3 and enables the technology of tomorrow. But it always comes through the lens of compliance, security, risk management. One of the things that I really truly value about being at ZeroHash is that the culture really is about, okay, we're going to do these fun things, but we're going to do them the right way. We're going to make sure that we're, staying secure, that that we understand the risks that we're opening up, the ones that we're protecting against, the ones that we're accepting, the trade-offs that we're making. We understand the way that this is going to be viewed by the various regulatory agencies. We stay out in front with them on the, not just like responding to exams and following the letter of the law, but staying in connection with them, talking regularly, having regularly checkups, so that we can help to influence, their thinking in those different ways. We can provide, that insight into what's happening in the industry and the ways that you're able to really behave, again, both in a Web3 world, but do it in a way that is appropriate, that protects the company, protects the end users, protects the technology. And as we as an industry all kind of think and behave and operate this way, we can really stand this up correct from the beginning.
Yeah, that's very important. And we talked about risk. So, as a CISO, you have a very broad view of risk across multiple areas, and we mentioned some of them. If you would, boil down the main points that you see now as the most pressing in terms of security threats for the Web3 industry right now, what would they be?
The biggest thing, I think, for the Web3 industry is that it's young enough and populated enough by people that are super interested in building and creating and enabling, and this is all really great. But the security threats, the security concerns really, in a lot of cases, come down to the foundation. It's the basic blocking and tackling of security in general, because all of your traditional security concepts, all of your, call it Web 2 security, all still applies here. You still have to get that right. And then you have to get the Web 3 stuff right. The biggest thing really when it comes to security, in my view, that Web 3 changed is mostly about speed and magnitude. So you have exploits happening faster than they used to, and they happen more permanently than they used to. In the traditional like fiat world, if somebody hacked into your account and drained it, I mean, if you're paying attention, you see this reasonably quickly, you can usually get the money back, or at least most of it. I mean, you can reverse an ACH. Law enforcement can reverse wires if you get in touch with them quickly enough. I mean, it's not really that permanent as long as you're responding correctly.
Yeah,
But
plus you're insured and you can get chargebacks.
Yeah, I mean, you have response strategies, in the fiat world and in the the way that things used to be, that don't really apply anymore necessarily. I mean, if you get hackers in and they drain your wallet, it's gone. You can't reverse that. So the stakes are inherently higher. You don't really always get a second chance to make it right. And there are some layers like insurance that are starting to come in and be able to provide a little bit of a backstop, but that's more of replacing the money than getting it back. So I still view that as a little bit of a difference there. But like I said, with the newness of the technology, you've got a lot of people in the industry that are really about creating. And this is great. We need this. We're still at that point of time in the industry and in the technology. You have people that are out there, they're building systems, or writing smart contracts, or creating bridges. They're making all this really cool tech that's based on enabling a certain thing. You want to allow people to do X or Y or whatever it is, but they're not really taking the time to think about the exploits. Thinking about, okay, I want to enable this, but I can't enable that. You have to think about the behavior that's not okay at the same time you're thinking about the behavior that is okay. And then you have to make sure that the tech is secured against that. They have all these great intentions. They're optimizing for speed and convenience. And again, I'm not talking down on any of that. The ways that those things can get exploited aren't really as clearly established. Again, it's all newer. It's a little bit harder to predict what might go wrong. And then when it does go wrong, it tends to be a little more permanent than it used to be also.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. And that's something that we see all the time, unfortunately, on a weekly basis when we have to call companies and tell them that, we discovered that they were hacked. And something that strikes me is the fact that, they could have prevented it beforehand, or at least they could have minimize the loss if they would catch it on time, right? So
Yeah.
it's kind of like with insurance. It's not the same thing if you insure your car after the accident or before the accident, right? And then what we see right after the hack, the awareness goes to this level, and they say, yeah, what can I do to protect my system? But then obviously it's too late. Unless one more thing that we're also seeing is that a lot of hackers are coming back to the crime scene. So it's definitely reasonable to protect your system even post hack, but it would be much, much better to do it beforehand.
Oh yeah, for sure. And what really I don't know, something that I don't think that companies as a whole or the industry as a whole takes enough advantage of is when something like that happens, like you just described. Cyvers comes in, they detect that something's happening. Many cases, this will turn into they'll release a blog post or there will be a news article or something written about it. The rest of the industry should pay attention to that. Read those news stories, read those blog posts. I mean, if you've been around for a minute, you can generally tell by reading, okay, this is what happened. All right, they got in through, an open port, or they got in through they fished their way into this account, or whatever it was. You can generally kind of tell what happened. And then go fix it in your environment before they come and get you. Like the number of times that there are repeat issues, multiple companies get hit one after another by the same tactics and techniques. It just I don't know, it makes me sad. It makes me want to really get out there, like this, and get in front of people and say, just it's out there. Just go read, go apply that to your environment, and now you're the one that's being proactive in preventing tomorrow's breach.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There are some patterns that keep, repeating themselves. Having said that, we see a lot of zero-day attacks that nobody had expected. There are ways to go about it. And again, if you have, monitoring and preemptive preventions, they can actually stop even the zero-day attacks. But I think that, CISOs and in general, security people in the Web3 space need to be aware of not only what they do know, but about what they don't know that can happen.
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure. It's one thing to protect against the known problems. It's another thing to protect against the unknown problems. And it requires a little bit more creativity, more foresight, more risk management, more multi-layered experience to be able to come in and say, this thing that you've built in this edge case could be used to work in this completely different way that you didn't even anticipate, and could end up with you losing everything or losing a huge number of assets, or that your users get scammed or frauded or whatever it is. And you do have to make time to really think about that and make sure that the things that you're building, if it's a smart contract or something like that, make sure that the contract is written very precisely to only do the thing that you want it to do and nothing else. You don't want to be lax with these things. You can't be overly permissive, because it's easier to we'll just claim all the permissions, and hopefully we'll make sure that'll cover everything. You can't really do that. You have to be precise. You have to build very exactly to enable only the thing that you're wanting to enable and nothing else. And that'll help with a lot of the 0 days that your firm sees and that we see and everyone sees.
Yeah, for sure. Just to give you some data, I remember that in 2023, the majority of the attacks and the majority of the funds lost from these attacks were primarily among smart contracts. It was primarily smart contract vulnerabilities. A lot of DeFi protocols were hacked. But during 2024, we saw a shift, and actually about 81% of the funds lost originated from primarily access control violations. And more specifically, about 60% were CeFi entities, centralized exchanges, and so on. So I'm just curious: are you aware of centralized entities becoming the primary target, and how are you preparing for that? Because obviously, in 2023, every DeFi protocol that I was talking to was very, very scared that they might get hacked. But right now, the tides have shifted towards CeFi, and I'm just wondering how it feels like and how are you guys preparing for that?
I mean, we always look at ourselves and look at the industry as a whole, but look at firms like ourselves as we're the targets of the best hacking groups in the world. Because that's like you said, that's really what's happening. They can focus on this DeFi protocol that a decent number of people use, but really the aggregate number of assets pales in comparison to what CeFi firms can end up amassing, especially as you get more institutions, you get more big investment dollars coming in. A lot of the tokenization stuff that's taking off is really bringing a lot of assets into the space. And so it makes perfect sense, really, that CeFi is going to be a big part of that target, us included. Like I said, we include ourselves in looking at ourselves as being a huge target of, like I said, the best hacking groups in the world. And so when it comes to access control, we try to look at that through the lens of insider risk. It's easy to entrust somebody with the ability to move funds, especially when you're thinking about like off hours kind of times, because you do have to have somebody able to operate 24/365, kind of no matter what holiday it might be, no matter what's going on in the world. Crypto operates all the time. There's no off time for crypto. And so we have to be able to match that. And it gets kind of expensive, for a lot of firms to have 2 or 3 or 4 people available at all times, no matter what holiday it is, whether it's wherever you happen to be in the world. But so we really look at this very closely in that we have to have multiple layers of approvals. We have to have multiple things, but you can't make it too hard for people to operate. You can't make it too hard to move funds, or else, the whole kind of premise breaks down, really. But we have, I guess to peel back the curtain a little bit, we do layers and layers and layers of controls for this, because it's a very serious risk. This insider risk thing is something that affects everybody. So on the front line, we start by we hire very stringently, of course. We do international background checks on every single person. We want to make sure that we bring the right person in. And then we secure all of their user accounts very tightly. Especially access to anything that's sensitive, all has MFA enforced, corporate devices, secure tunnels, device monitoring, kind of all of your traditional foundational blocking and tackling stuff. And then inside the transaction, it really makes sense to try to automate as much of that as you can, create fewer manual transactions for a person to even be able to compromise. And then you've got your layers of review above that for making sure that the automated system is working correctly, an additional layer for a larger type of movement, an additional layer above that for an even larger type of movement. You have these multiple eyes that are still on it. We take the idea that even a user that is totally trusted, maybe they've been with us for years, maybe they're in a leadership role, they're totally authorized to be in this system, they still shouldn't be able to exploit it. And if they can't do it with all of their knowledge, then neither could an attacker who happens to get a hold of their account. I mean, really, we've built things inside of ZeroHash so that there is no user, there's no person at all that could single-handedly move assets out of our wallets.
Yeah, that's very interesting and really fascinating to understand this multi-layered structure. It looks very, very impressive. So we talked about the many different facets of security, and one of them would be real-time monitoring. So C4, which is the consortium behind the CCSS certification, kind of the gold standard for wallets and for custodianship, they just released their V9 guide. And in this guide, and I'm humbled to say that they got the inspiration from Cyvers and they gave us a shout out within the guide. They talked about real-time monitoring being a prerequisite to obtain the certification. What's your take on real-time monitoring, and how can it help SOC teams and CISOs to protect the assets?
I mean, in the same way that you have to have real-time monitoring of anything that matters. If this, and this applies to Web3, it applies to Web2, it applies to any kind of business in any kind of industry. If there's something that matters to your company, to your users, to your entire line of business, you always have to be watching it. You always have to have real-time monitoring, no matter what it is. So I don't really view that as being a requirement that's especially different or alarming or in anything in any way. It's just, this is kind of what you have to do if you're going to take this stuff seriously. If you're going to be a custodian, if you're going to be a wallet provider, if you're going to be creating these contracts, if you're going to be creating these bridges, these all of these different like parts of the system that all have this really important role in moving funds, moving assets when required, and not moving them when it's not required, keeping them safe and held in one place. You can't really do that if you're not paying attention, if you don't have real-time monitoring. If you rely on, we're just gonna we'll get an alert tomorrow, or I'm sure at some point the system would let us know that this happens. No, like we talked about earlier, it's too late by that point. It's already gone. You can't go and reverse it in the way that you could maybe a fiat exploit or something. So I mean, you have to be watching all the time. You have to know it right away.
Yeah, for sure. And may I add also that you also need to make sure that the quality of monitoring is something that is really worth the while, because at the end of the day, you need to make sure that, with respect to false positives or false negatives, you're covered. Because if you have monitoring, you need to trust the integrity of the alerting system that basically provides you with the alerts and the heads up.
Yeah, isn't that always the problem with SOCs and SIMs and IDS and all the different techniques and technologies that we've had for decades? The hard part isn't putting it in. The hard part is refining it. The hard part is making it useful. The hard part is creating a process to be able to detect and respond to these things when they come up, to know that your alerts are dialed in, to not get buried in false positives. Like you said, all of these things. It's a forever challenge in the industry, in the security industry as a whole. And really that's the art part of the science, is knowing how to dial that in so that you're getting actionable intelligence and not getting bogged down with stuff that doesn't matter.
Yeah, for sure. So beyond securing the assets when they're idle, obviously a much bigger challenge is to secure them when they're on the move, right? So transaction security is one of the things that we see right now as a huge challenge for companies. So what are the best practices that you implement or recommend to others with respect to how to mitigate fraud and cyber threats with respect to securing transactions?
It's important to know what the transaction is for, and to know that it's the thing that's being executed, the movement that you're submitting on chain, or this transaction that's come to you, maybe for review and approval before it goes out. Is this actually the thing that it's supposed to be? Is it actually from an authorized source? Does it make sense against the rest of the context around it? What is this transaction for? What are their previous transactions? Where is it going? Why is it going there? Did it just come in from somewhere else? Or is this really just being washed? Like, what is happening with this? Being able to see that whole context around it is a really important part to being able to detect and then ultimately prevent those kind of fraud and scams. And this is one area where I think blockchain really is helpful in this case, because in many cases, it's easier to see that context because of the public blockchain than it is if you're just dealing with like cash transactions, for example, or really a lot of fiat types of movements. It's harder to see what all happened before. It's harder to see what this particular actor has done in other instances or in other contexts. It's harder to get that fuller picture in the more traditional types of systems. And this is one place where I do think that blockchain has given us the ability to get much better at this. We just have to do that. We have to take advantage of that ability. We have to have the systems, have the processes, have the ability to use this information that's available to us, because it is information that we haven't always readily had.
Yeah, but having said that, blockchain is data rich, but context poor, right? So you need to contextualize the data that you have. Again, data processing is not a new thing, and even contextualization, but it's becoming much harder, right? So the fact, for instance, that you can just open a wallet and it has no traceability at all is something that makes it very hard for you to understand that this wallet is affiliated with, let's say, a fraudulent network, or with a hacker that eventually wants to trick you into sending funds into this wallet. So I think that one of the biggest challenges, and that's something that we see with our clients as well, is how to find the right context and how to identify this maliciousness. So data is abundant, but definitely the contextualization is the biggest challenge.
Yes, and it is. I mean, it is something that you have to create. You have to be able to put these pieces together, and in certain cases, not all of the pieces are there. If it is a brand new wallet with no history, no transactions, nothing to look at, there's not a whole lot to go on with that. But you can also look at other patterns around, okay, who are the people that are bringing us brand new empty wallets with no transaction history? What are they doing? Where is this transaction trying to go? Is it also going to a brand new wallet with no history, or is it going to some other place that other things have gone to? There's always going to be the person that shows up without really anything around them. I mean, the same as if somebody showed up at your bank with no history. Like, you don't really know anything about this person. They show up with a wallet. For us, we don't really know anything about this person, but you can still assemble contextual clues around it. There's still other things that are available to us. And again, things that haven't always been available decades ago in the traditional fiat world, where we can still create some of that picture. And ultimately, I mean, if you're not sure if something smells bad, you get experience out there, you get experience in the industry, and you kind of start trusting your gut a little bit and saying, all right, we need some additional review. Maybe we need some additional information. You can go ask for context if it's not readily available to you. You try not to do that any more than you have to, but in some cases you just have to. You just have to go and directly ask for the things that you can't find.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, one of the things that we see is, just as you mentioned, you have this binary thing where you have wallets with zero activity, which is clearly something fishy, right? And then you have the wallets that have been already flagged in, OFAC sanctioned or flagged as, pig butchering affiliated wallets. The challenge is whatever's in the middle, right? And what we find is that the most important thing here is to contextualize fast. Because if you're able to take one single transaction that this wallet has done and to trace it back and to figure out who has this wallet been interacting with, and to trace it back to a fraudulent network and to inform the client on time, then it's bingo, right? So that's the golden moment where you can catch this wallet when it's relatively new, but you can already flag it on time and prevent, the future fraud from happening.
Yeah, that's the bingo moment, I think, is a great description for that. That's the peak that we all look for. Let's be able to catch this right in the nick of time, make sure that it's the right block, make sure that if we're going to stop this transaction, that we turn out to be correct in the end for having stopped this transaction, and we're not just blocking things on a whim or blocking things because maybe our alerts aren't tuned in, or the system that's helping us be able to dig into this maybe is creating some false positive or has some rule that's off. We need to be able to make sure that we have the things in place so that when we take these actions, and really when the automated system ideally takes these actions because it's able to do this faster than a human can, that it's correct, that it's proven right in the end when it does.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about monitoring and the response to alerts that you're getting, but for the most of it, the crypto industry is quite reactionary, right? So you get an alert and then you react, and you want to do it fast enough. But now there are also tools that are more proactive or even preemptive, right? So just to give you an example, if you are familiar with the WazirX hack that took place in July, right? One of the biggest hacks in 2024, the largest exchange in India, 235 million gone in a matter of a few seconds. So one of the things that we identified there is that the malicious smart contract, which we actually flagged as malicious without knowing who is going to be the victim, right? But the smart contract itself was considered malicious. It was deployed 8 days before the hack. And then, if I'm not mistaken, a day before the hack, it already started running some tests. So if had the leaders of or the security leaders of the platform were tracking these types of things like malicious smart contracts and then tracking their interactions, they could have actually prevented it beforehand. And also now you have other preemptive measures like simulations and validations and things of that sort. What's your take on it? Is this the next step to prevent hacks, to become more proactive and preemptive?
I mean, I think it's one of the layers for sure. You want to be able to, kind of like I said earlier, you want to make sure that the contracts that you're writing, the contracts you're interacting with, the contracts that you're reviewing for any reason, whatsoever, are written correctly or written precisely, only allow the thing that you want to be able to allow them to do. And services like yours do a really great job of being able to detect over permissions and contracts that, they do what they say that they do, but they also do these three other things. Did you know they do these three other things? You probably ought to know, because if you're only using them for one thing, you need to know how else they can be exploited. And this is definitely a really good example, and the one that you just gave there is a great example of you having the ability to be proactive with that. You have to be able to take advantage of it, and take advantage of it as one of your layers of security, because you still have to protect against all of the other types of threats that you have, including the more basic fundamental security issues that are out there. Once those things are solved, once you've got that in order, you've got that stuff sorted, you get into the specific Web3 things, and smart contracts is a huge part of it. So being able to have a system to predict when a contract is going to go rogue, or to be able to yellow flag or red flag a contract before you start interacting with it, I think is a huge next step in helping out, not just your company, but then the industry and the reputation of the industry as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. So we're approaching the end of the show. Time flies by. And before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, so we started from that, the fact that you're kind of in the intersection between law and compliance and security. So I think that, it would be good to hear your take on regulation with respect to security. So we know that DORA, for instance, the regulation that is kind of adjacent to MICA in Europe, has just kicked in, but we haven't seen anything comprehensive with respect to security from the regulators, right? So you see very proactive regulation with respect to securities, right? In a sense of what you can and cannot do. And the idea is to protect the investors. But, it's no secret that investors can lose much more money from, not from market volatility, but from one single hack or one single fraud. So what's your take on it? Do you think that there needs to be some sort of regulation with respect to security measures, or should it stay just voluntary and you should just raise the awareness and education?
I mean, as a general matter, I tend to welcome regulation because I welcome standards. Like, if everyone is operating along roughly the same standards, then it gives you that predictability. You can understand a little more about what can happen, what can't happen. Risk is about uncertainty at the end of the day. It's about, do we know what can happen? Do we not know what can happen? And risk management is about bringing certainty to the uncertain. And so I tend to view regulation and standards and rules in that context. It provides us some of that certainty. It tells you the rules of the game. It gives you the table stakes. so that when you're interacting with another company, when you're interacting with a protocol or whatever it is that you're trying to do, you have a little bit of that foundational expectation coming in of what they could be. In the US, of course, we don't have very much of this. We still have a whole lot of fighting, but just between regulators on even who is allowed to create the rules, let alone what are the rules themselves. And so it has been somewhat uncertain, and there's been some things allowed that maybe shouldn't have been allowed. It's the way that things are. And so we end up taking that more in-house and taking more responsibility internally for this. When we're working with a client, or when we're working with a vendor, when we're working with whoever it is on the outside of us, we view them all as being third parties, and we review everybody. We don't do business with anybody either upstream or downstream without reviewing them first, doing our diligence on them first. If we had better rules, regulations, maybe we wouldn't have to do that quite so much. We could rely on the regulator to do it for us. But at this point, it is what it is. Things will continue to evolve, and we'll continue to evolve with it, and we'll do it in a way that is takes seriously the security, the risk management. We want to make sure that not just our company is protected, but ultimately that our end users are protected. We want to do things right for them.
Yeah, and if I may add, I think that now with the new administration and the White House, we'll have to see what happens with respect to regulation. I think that there will be kind of a spillover effect into everything, right? We definitely see that with securities, with everything that is going on in the SEC, but it would be interesting to see how it evolves and in the States and then later on across the world.
Yeah, the new administration is definitely more open to things that the previous administration was not. And so the way that I look at that is the cone of uncertainty is greater than it was. It seems that the ceiling for what is possible now under the new administration, the ceiling is higher than it's been for quite some time. But also the floor is lower. That those opportunities could turn into exploits. So these things that you can build to do good could also be built to do bad. And so the range of possibilities of what might happen over the next 4 years, I don't pretend to be able to predict adequately, but we will always keep an eye on it. We will always make sure to try to stay, if not in step with it, maybe even a half step ahead, so that we can anticipate what's coming and make sure we're in the right rooms, we're talking to the right people, we can have whatever influence we can have, we can get whatever intelligence we can get, so that we can make sure that we are ready for whatever might come, good, bad, or otherwise.
Yeah. So on this positive note, we'll end the show. Scott, thank you so much. By the way, where can we follow you? Are you active on Twitter, on LinkedIn?
Follow me on LinkedIn. Yes, I don't post as much as I probably should. I should probably get on that this year.
Yeah, you're gonna get like thousands of followers after this show, so you probably should.
You promise?
Scott, thank you so much.
Yes, thanks, Michael. Had a great time. Thank you.
Web3 Watchdogs is sponsored by Cyvers, your one-stop shop for Web3 security and threat mitigation. Cyvers harnesses the power of AI to eliminate hacks, scams, fraud, and compliance challenges in real time, and even before they happen. For more information, visit cyvers.ai. That's CYVERS.ai.